I never thought a corner office on the 42nd floor would feel like a prison cell until the day I discovered what Morrison Industries was really doing with my innovations. My name is Nathan Brooks, and for 3 years I believed I was building the future of renewable energy storage technology. Turns out I was just another cog in a machine designed to crush innovation and steal dreams. The Seattle skyline stretched endlessly beyond my floor-to-ceiling windows, the Space Needle piercing through the morning fog like a needle through fabric. Coffee shops dotted every corner below, their warm lights flickering on as the city awakened. But inside Morrison Industries' gleaming headquarters, the atmosphere was anything but warm. "Nathan, we need to talk." The voice belonged to Richard Morrison, my boss and the company's CEO. His gray suit was impeccable as always, but something in his tone made my stomach tighten. He stood in my doorway, his pale blue eyes scanning my cluttered desk where prototypes of my latest battery design lay scattered among technical drawings and coffee-stained notebooks. "Sure, Mr. Morrison. What's on your mind?" I saved my work and spun my chair around to face him. The morning light caught the silver threads in his perfectly styled hair, making him look distinguished and predatory at the same time. "Pack your things. We're taking a trip to our manufacturing facility in Portland. There are some things you need to see." His words were clipped, businesslike, but something felt off. In 3 years of working here, Morrison had never personally escorted me anywhere. "When do we leave?" I asked, already mentally preparing for another corporate dog and pony show. These trips usually involved showing off our latest achievements to potential investors or government officials. Now, cars waiting downstairs. The drive to Seattle-Tacoma Airport was eerily quiet. Morrison spent the entire 40-minute journey on his phone, speaking in hushed tones about containment protocols and asset management. I stared out the window, watching the familiar suburbs of Seattle blur past. Families walked their dogs in manicured neighborhoods, kids rode bikes on sidewalks, and life continued its normal rhythm while I felt increasingly like I was being pulled into something I didn't understand. The private jet was smaller than I expected, with cream leather seats and mahogany trim that screamed expensive. Morrison sat across from me, his laptop open, fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The only sounds were the engine's steady hum and the occasional ding of his email notifications. "Mr. Morrison, what exactly are we going to see in Portland?" I finally asked as we cruised above the cloud line. The landscape below looked like cotton balls scattered across a blue canvas. He looked up from his screen, those pale eyes studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You'll see soon enough, Nathan. Let's just say your hard work is about to pay off in ways you never imagined." Something about his smile made my skin crawl. It wasn't the warm, encouraging smile he'd given me when I first joined the company, fresh out of MIT with big dreams and bigger ambitions. This smile was sharp, calculated, like a predator showing its teeth. The Portland facility was nothing like our Seattle headquarters. Where Morrison Industries' main building was all glass and steel, reaching toward the sky with ambition, this warehouse squatted on the outskirts of the city like a concrete toad. Chain-link fences topped with barbed wire surrounded the perimeter, and security guards with serious expressions and even more serious weapons checked our credentials at multiple checkpoints. "Welcome to the real Morrison Industries," Richard said as we walked through the main entrance. The interior was a maze of assembly lines, conveyor belts, and workers in identical gray uniforms. But what caught my attention were the products being manufactured. Rows upon rows of battery units, each one bearing the distinctive design elements I had developed over the past 3 years. "These are my batteries," I said, stopping dead in my tracks. Workers moved with mechanical precision, assembling units that contained my proprietary cooling system, my breakthrough electrolyte formula, my revolutionary casing design. But the specifications are different. These aren't for renewable energy storage. Morrison's smile grew wider. "No, Nathan. These are for military applications. Drone systems, to be precise. Your little green energy project was just the cover story we needed to develop next-generation weapons technology." The blood drained from my face as the pieces fell into place. All those late nights in the lab, all those presentations about saving the planet, all those conversations about leaving a better world for future generations had been nothing but an elaborate lie. I had been developing technology that would be used to rain death from the sky. "You can't do this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what we agreed to." Actually, Nathan, if you read your employment contract carefully, particularly Section 12 subsection 4, you'll find that all innovations developed on company time using company resources belong exclusively to Morrison Industries. We can use them however we see fit. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 3 years of my life, my dreams, my passion, all perverted into something monstrous. The workers continued their assembly line ballet, oblivious to the personal apocalypse happening just a few feet away. "I won't be part of this," I said, finding my voice again. "I quit." Morrison's laugh was cold and sharp. "Oh, Nathan. You sweet, naive boy. You think you can just walk away? You've seen too much. You know too much. Besides, where would you go? Who would hire you? I have connections throughout the industry. One word from me and you'll never work in tech again." The warehouse suddenly felt suffocating. The air was thick with the smell of industrial lubricants and ozone from the electrical systems. Workers moved around us like ghosts, their faces hidden behind protective masks and safety goggles. I realized I was completely alone in a place where my moral objections meant nothing and my expertise had made me a liability. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Your continued cooperation, of course. And your silence. You'll return to Seattle, continue your research, and develop even better technology for us. In exchange, you'll be very well compensated. Consider it a promotion." "And if I refuse?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something dark and dangerous. "Let's not explore that option, shall we? You have a comfortable life, Nathan. A nice apartment in Capitol Hill, a promising career, a bright future. It would be a shame if any of that were to disappear." The threat hung in the air between us like poisonous gas. I looked around the warehouse again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just a manufacturing facility. It was a monument to corporate greed and moral bankruptcy, and I had been its unwitting architect. As we prepared to leave, Morrison placed a hand on my shoulder with false paternal warmth. "Think about it, Nathan. Think about your future. Think about what's best for everyone involved." The flight back to Seattle felt like a funeral march. I stared out the window at the darkening landscape below, city lights beginning to twinkle like fallen stars. My phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues asking about my sudden disappearance, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. How do you explain that your entire professional life has been built on a foundation of lies? Back in my apartment that night, I sat on my couch with a glass of whiskey, staring at the walls covered with patents and awards I had received for my work. Each certificate, each recognition now felt like evidence of my own naivety. The city hummed with life outside my windows, but inside, I felt utterly alone. I pulled out my laptop and began researching Morrison Industries more thoroughly than I ever had before. What I found made my blood run cold. Government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Connections to defense contractors with questionable reputations. A web of subsidiaries and shell companies that stretched across multiple countries. I had been working for a weapons manufacturer all along, and I had been too blinded by my own ambitions to see it. The next morning, I walked into my office with a heavy heart and a clearer head. Morrison was waiting for me, sitting behind my desk like he owned it, which I supposed he did. "Have you made your decision, Nathan?" I looked at him for a long moment, studying the man who had twisted my dreams into nightmares. "I'll stay," I said finally. "But I have conditions." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You're hardly in a position to make demands." "Maybe not, but I'm still the only one who understands how my technology works. You need me, Mr. Morrison. At least until you can find someone else to reverse engineer what I've created." I sat down across from him, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "I want full transparency about how my work is being used. I want to review all applications before they go into production. And I want a significant increase in my compensation package." Morrison studied me for several seconds, then slowly smiled. "Very well. But remember, Nathan, you're walking a very narrow line. Don't make me regret this generosity." As he left my office, I realized I had just made a deal with the devil. But sometimes, when you're trapped in hell, you have to become the devil to find your way out. 2 months after discovering the truth about Morrison Industries, I had become someone I didn't recognize. By day, I played the part of the compliant engineer, developing new battery technologies and pretending not to notice when my designs disappeared into military applications. By night, I documented everything, building a case that could potentially bring down the entire operation. My apartment had transformed into a command center. The dining table was covered with printouts of government contracts, financial records I'd carefully photographed, and technical specifications that proved how my renewable energy technology was being weaponized. Post-it notes created a complex web on my living room wall, connecting names, dates, and transactions like a detective's investigation board. The morning fog hung heavy over Seattle as I made my way to work, the familiar weight of deception pressing down on my shoulders. The Space Needle was barely visible through the gray mist, a ghost of itself, much like I felt I had become. Downtown bustled with its usual energy. Coffee vendors called out daily specials, early commuters clutched their laptops and lattes, and the city pulsed with the rhythm of honest work. I envied them their clear consciences. "Nathan, my office. Now." Morrison's voice cut through the morning chatter of the engineering department. He stood at his doorway, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the fluorescent lights. I followed him into his corner office, noting how he closed the door with deliberate care. The Seattle skyline spread out behind him, but today it looked more like a backdrop for an interrogation than a view. "We have a problem," he said, settling behind his massive mahogany desk. "Someone's been asking questions about our Portland facility." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that could make people very uncomfortable. A journalist from the Washington Post has been sniffing around, claiming to have inside information about military applications of supposedly civilian technology." His pale eyes never left my face, searching for tells, for signs of guilt. "That's concerning," I managed to say, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Any idea who might be talking?" Morrison leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "That's what we need to find out. I'm implementing new security protocols immediately. All communications will be monitored. All employees with access to sensitive information will undergo enhanced background checks. And anyone found to be communicating with outside parties about company business will face immediate termination and legal action." The threat was clear, but I had expected this. In fact, I had been counting on it. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. We can't have corporate secrets getting out." "I'm glad you understand, Nathan. Because your cooperation will be especially important in the coming weeks. We have some new projects that will require your particular expertise." He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were technical specifications for what appeared to be a new type of drone system, smaller and more maneuverable than anything I had seen before. The power requirements were massive, which meant they needed my battery technology to make it work. "Autonomous surveillance units," Morrison explained, "capable of operating for weeks without human intervention. Your batteries would give them the endurance they need to monitor large areas for extended periods." I studied the documents, my stomach turning as I realized the implications. This wasn't just about weapons anymore. This was about surveillance, about watching people, about the kind of technology that could turn any city into a police state. "This is impressive engineering," I said carefully. "When do you need the power systems?" 3 months. There's a demonstration scheduled for some very important clients." He paused, letting that sink in. Clients who could make Morrison Industries very wealthy and very powerful. I nodded, already planning how to document this new horror. "I'll get started right away." That afternoon, I met with Rebecca Walsh, our investigative journalist from the Washington Post, in a small coffee shop in the Pike Place Market. The place was perfect for clandestine meetings, always crowded with tourists and locals, the constant buzz of conversation providing cover for sensitive discussions. Rebecca was younger than I had expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp green eyes and prematurely gray streaks in her brown hair that suggested someone who had seen too much too young. She wore a simple black coat and carried a worn leather messenger bag that had seen plenty of stories. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and rain-soaked wood, quintessentially Seattle. "I know this isn't easy for you. You have no idea," I said, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee that I hadn't touched. "Morrison suspects someone is talking. Security is being tightened as we speak." Rebecca pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the table between us. "Are you ready to go on the record?" I stared at the device for a long moment. Once I started talking, there would be no going back. Morrison's threats weren't idle. He had the resources and connections to destroy my career, my reputation, maybe even my life. But then I thought about those surveillance drones, about the weapons being built with my technology, about all the ways my dreams had been perverted. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm ready." For the next hour, I told Rebecca everything. The fake renewable energy program, the weapons manufacturing in Portland, the military contracts hidden behind shell companies, the new surveillance project. She listened with the intensity of someone accustomed to uncovering corporate malfeasance, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting specific details. "This is bigger than just one company," she said when I finished. Morrison Industries appears to be part of a larger network of defense contractors operating in legal gray areas. Your story could be the key to exposing the whole system. How long before you publish? I asked. I need to verify some of the information independently, contact other sources, get responses from the companies involved. Maybe 2 weeks, possibly 3. 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. I had to continue my double life, pretending to develop the surveillance drone power systems while secretly gathering more evidence. Every day would be a tightrope walk over an abyss of corporate retribution. There's something else, Rebecca said, lowering her voice even though the coffee shop noise provided ample cover. I've been investigating similar operations in other cities. Morrison Industries isn't alone in this. There's a whole network of companies using civilian technology development as a cover for military applications. Your case could be the domino that brings down the entire operation. That night, I worked late in my apartment, photographing new documents I had managed to smuggle out of the office. The surveillance drone project was even worse than I had initially thought. The specifications called for facial recognition software, behavioral analysis algorithms, and communication intercept capabilities. They weren't just building drones, they were building the tools of oppression. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop what you're doing. Some things are better left buried." I stared at the message for several minutes, my hands shaking slightly. Morrison's people were watching me, probably monitoring my communications, possibly even surveilling my apartment. I had become a prisoner in my own life, trapped between my conscience and my survival instincts. But I couldn't stop now. Too much was at stake. The next few days passed in a blur of paranoid hypervigilance. I varied my routes to work, checked for surveillance, and used burner phones to communicate with Rebecca. At the office, I played my part perfectly, developing the power systems for the surveillance drones while secretly documenting every aspect of the project. Morrison watched me constantly, his pale eyes following my movements, analyzing my expressions, searching for signs of betrayal. But I had become an accomplished actor, smiling and nodding at his instructions while internally cataloging evidence that would eventually destroy him. "How's the drone project coming along?" he asked one afternoon, appearing at my lab bench without warning. "Ahead of schedule, actually," I replied, not looking up from my work. "The new lithium polymer configuration is exceeding all performance expectations." "Excellent. Our clients will be very pleased." He paused, studying my face. "You know, Nathan, loyalty is a rare commodity these days. I hope I can continue to count on yours." "Of course, Mr. Morrison. Morrison Industries has been very good to me." He nodded slowly, but I could see the suspicion in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, even if he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. That evening, Rebecca called with an update. "I've confirmed most of your information through independent sources," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "This story is going to be huge. But I need one more piece of evidence. Something that directly links Morrison to the military contracts." "What kind of evidence?" "Financial records, contract documents, something that shows the money trail. Without that, Morrison's lawyers will claim everything is speculation and hearsay." I knew exactly what she needed, and I knew where to find it. Morrison's personal computer contained all the financial records, all the contracts, all the smoking gun evidence that would prove the connection between my civilian technology and military applications. But accessing it would require me to break into his office after hours, a move that would be incredibly dangerous if I got caught. "I'll see what I can do," I told her. "Be careful, Nathan. These people aren't just corporate executives. Some of them have connections to intelligence agencies, military contractors, people who play for keeps." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall of evidence I had assembled. Photos, documents, technical specifications, all telling the same story of corporate greed and moral bankruptcy. But Rebecca was right. Without financial proof, it was all just the word of a disgruntled employee against a powerful corporation. I spent the next week planning my infiltration of Morrison's office. I studied the security protocols, memorized guard rotations, and identified the best entry and exit routes. The building's security system was sophisticated but not impenetrable. I had legitimate access to most areas, and my keycard would get me into the executive floor after hours. The night I chose for my mission was perfect. Heavy rain drummed against the windows of Morrison Industries headquarters, and most of the security staff was focused on monitoring the perimeter rather than internal movement. I entered through the main lobby, nodding casually to the night security guard who recognized me as a dedicated employee working late again. Morrison's office felt different at night, more sinister somehow. The city lights twinkled beyond his windows like distant stars, but inside, shadows seemed to lurk in every corner. I sat behind his massive desk, fingers trembling slightly as I powered up his computer. The financial files were exactly where I expected them to be, hidden behind multiple layers of encryption and password protection. But I had been watching Morrison input his passwords for months, and I had a good memory for patterns. After 20 minutes of careful probing, I was in. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. Morrison Industries had received over $200 million in military contracts over the past 5 years. My battery technology had been used in weapons systems deployed in 3 different countries. The surveillance drone project was just the latest in a long line of civilian technologies perverted for military use. I photographed everything, working quickly but thoroughly. Financial records, contract documents, correspondence with military officials, even personal emails where Morrison bragged about fooling his engineers into developing weapons technology under the guise of renewable energy research. As I prepared to leave, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. My heart hammered against my ribs as I quickly shut down the computer and moved away from the desk. The footsteps paused outside Morrison's office and I held my breath, certain I was about to be discovered. But the security guard continued his patrol, and I escaped the building without incident, the evidence safely stored on an encrypted flash drive in my jacket pocket. The next morning, I delivered the evidence to Rebecca. She studied the documents with growing amazement, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "This is incredible," she said finally. Morrison wasn't just selling technology to the military. He was actively helping them develop new weapons systems. And the surveillance drone project is connected to a classified program that's been running for over 2 years. How long before you publish? The story goes live tomorrow morning. After that, there's no going back for any of us. I nodded, knowing that my life was about to change forever. Morrison would know immediately that I was the source of the leak. There would be legal challenges, death threats, possibly even physical danger. But I had made my choice. Some secrets were too dangerous to keep. That night, I packed a suitcase with essential belongings and withdrew a substantial amount of cash from my savings account. Tomorrow I would become a whistleblower, and whistleblowers needed to be prepared for anything. The Washington Post article went live at 6 a.m. Pacific time on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. "Secret weapons program hides behind green energy facade," screamed the headline, accompanied by a photo of Morrison Industries' gleaming headquarters. By 7 a.m., my phone was ringing nonstop with calls from reporters, lawyers, and numbers I didn't recognize. I had checked into a small hotel near the Seattle waterfront the night before, paying cash and using a fake name. From my window, I could see ferries crossing Elliott Bay like white ghosts against the gray morning water. The familiar rhythm of the city continued below, but I no longer felt part of it. I had become something else entirely, a target. Morrison called at 7:23 a.m. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "You have no idea what you've done?" His voice was cold, controlled, but I could hear the rage underneath. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're a traitor. You've betrayed your country, your company, and everyone who trusted you." "I exposed a criminal operation," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "You lied to me for 3 years. You perverted my work into weapons. You signed a contract, Nathan. You knew the terms. Everything you developed belongs to Morrison Industries, and we have every right to use it as we see fit." His voice was getting sharper, more aggressive. "But that's not even the worst part. You have no idea who you're really dealing with." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Morrison Industries isn't just some private company. We have contracts with agencies you've never heard of, partnerships that go to the highest levels of government. You think the Washington Post article will protect you? You think public attention will keep you safe?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You naive fool. You've painted a target on your back that will never go away." The line went dead. I sat on the hotel bed, staring at my phone, Morrison's words echoing in my mind. I had known there would be consequences, but I had focused on legal and professional retaliation. The possibility of something darker, more dangerous, hadn't fully registered until now. By noon, the story had exploded across social media and cable news. CNN was running a segment called The Drone Deception, while Fox News focused on national security implications. My name was everywhere, along with my MIT graduation photo and a description of me as either a courageous whistleblower or a dangerous traitor, depending on the news source. Rebecca called around 2 p.m. "How are you holding up?" she asked, though I could hear the tension in her voice. "I've been better." Morrison called this morning. He seemed to think public exposure wouldn't protect me. Nathan, there's something you need to know. I've been getting pressure from my editors to reveal my sources. Someone very high up is pushing hard to get your name officially confirmed. But you've already identified me in the article. Not officially. Right now, you're described as a senior engineer familiar with the project. But if they force me to reveal you as the primary source, it becomes a different legal situation entirely. I understood. As long as my role remains somewhat ambiguous, Morrison Industries would have to be careful about direct retaliation. But once I was officially identified as the primary source, all bets were off. How long do you think you can hold them off? Maybe a day, possibly two. After that, I might not have a choice. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk along the waterfront to clear my head. The Pike Place Market was bustling with its usual energy, tourists snapping photos of fish-throwing vendors while locals navigated the crowds with practiced efficiency. The smell of fresh seafood and roasted coffee filled the air, and for a few moments, I could almost pretend my life hadn't just imploded. I was watching the ferry's dock when I noticed him, a man in a dark suit standing about 30 yards away, talking on his phone while keeping his eyes fixed on me. When I moved, he moved. When I stopped, he stopped. Morrison hadn't been bluffing about the surveillance. I spent the next 2 hours trying to lose my tail, ducking through crowded markets, hopping on and off buses, and taking circuitous routes through downtown Seattle. But every time I thought I had lost him, another watcher appeared. They were professionals rotating surveillance teams to avoid detection. By evening, I realized I was completely compromised. They knew where I was staying, where I was going, probably even who I was talking to. The hotel room no longer felt like a refuge, it felt like a trap. I called my sister Caroline in Portland using one of my burner phones. She was a nurse at OHSU, practical and level-headed, someone I had always been able to count on. Nathan? Your voice sounds strange. Are you okay? Caroline, I need your help. I can't explain everything over the phone, but I'm in serious trouble. Can I come stay with you for a few days? Of course. But what kind of trouble? This isn't like you to be so mysterious. Have you seen the news today? The story about Morrison Industries. There was a pause. Oh my God. That was you, wasn't it? You're the whistleblower. Yeah. And now I think I'm being followed. I need somewhere safe to figure out my next move. Come now. I'll leave the spare key under the flower pot by the back door. And Nathan? Be careful. I packed quickly and paid my hotel bill in cash, then took a taxi to the airport. But instead of going inside, I had the driver drop me at a nearby car rental agency. If they were watching transportation hubs, I needed an alternative route to Portland. The drive south took 4 hours through a steady drizzle that turned the highway into a ribbon of reflected light. I kept checking my mirrors, but the traffic seemed normal. Maybe I had finally managed to lose them, or maybe they were just better at staying invisible than I was at spotting them. Caroline's house sat in a quiet residential neighborhood near Mount Tabor, a 1920s bungalow with a small front yard and mature oak trees that provided natural camouflage. I parked 2 blocks away and approached through the alley, retrieving the key exactly where she had promised. Inside, the house felt warm and safe, filled with the comfortable clutter of someone who worked long hours but still tried to maintain a normal life. Medical journals sat stacked on the coffee table next to knitting projects and houseplants that somehow thrived despite Caroline's demanding schedule. She arrived home around midnight, still wearing her scrubs, exhaustion written across her face. But she hugged me fiercely, the way she had when we were kids and I'd gotten into trouble. I saw the news coverage, she said, settling onto the couch beside me. They're calling you everything from a patriot to a terrorist. What's the real story? I told her everything, starting with my first day at Morrison Industries and ending with Morrison's threatening phone call that morning. She listened without interruption, occasionally shaking her head or muttering under her breath. You did the right thing, she said when I finished. But you're also in way over your head. These people aren't just going to sue you and move on. They're going to try to destroy you. I know. The question is, what do I do about it? Caroline was quiet for several minutes, staring at the rain streaking down her living room windows. You need allies, she said finally. Other whistleblowers who've been through this, lawyers who specialize in this kind of case, maybe even government officials who want to see Morrison Industries brought down. Morrison said they had connections at high levels of government. I'm sure they do. But they can't have corrupted everyone. There have to be honest people in positions of power who would be outraged by what you've discovered. The next morning brought both hope and terror in equal measure. Rebecca's follow-up story had identified 2 other defense contractors using similar schemes, and several congressional representatives were calling for investigations. But my phone was also buzzing with messages from lawyers representing Morrison Industries, demanding that I return all proprietary materials and cease making defamatory statements. More worrying were the anonymous messages, "Stop talking or face consequences. Traitors deserve what they get. We know where you are." Caroline left for work around 7 a.m., but not before extracting a promise that I would stay inside and avoid using my real phone. I spent the morning researching whistleblower protection laws and trying to find lawyers who might be willing to represent me against a well-funded corporation with government connections. That's when I found Thomas Chin, a civil rights attorney in San Francisco who had represented 3 other defense industry whistleblowers. His cases had mixed results, but he had a reputation for being fearless and thorough. I called his office using one of my burner phones. "Mr. Brooks," he said when I explained who I was, "I've been expecting your call. Your story has created quite a stir down here. I need help. Morrison Industries is threatening legal action, and I think they're having me followed. Both are standard procedure for this type of case. The question is whether you're prepared for a long, expensive legal battle against opponents who have virtually unlimited resources." Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. You could apologize publicly, return any documents you've taken, and hope they're satisfied with destroying your career rather than your life. That's not really a choice. Thomas laughed, a sound that suggested he had heard similar sentiments before. "Then we need to meet in person. Can you get to San Francisco without being followed?" "I think so." "Good. There are some things you need to know about Morrison Industries that didn't make it into the newspaper. Things that could either save your life or get us both killed." I spent the rest of the day planning my route to San Francisco, using maps and travel guides to plot a course that would avoid major highways and transportation hubs. If Morrison's people were tracking me, they would expect me to take the most direct route. Instead, I would drive back roads through Oregon wine country, then cut west through the coastal mountains. Caroline returned home that evening with groceries and a grim expression. There were 2 men in suits asking questions at the hospital today. They claimed to be federal agents, but something felt wrong about them. They wanted to know if I had heard from you recently. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. But they left business cards with a phone number to call if you contacted me." She pulled a card from her purse. "Nathan, this is getting scary. Maybe you should just disappear for a while, let things cool down." I studied the business card. It looked official, complete with a Department of Homeland Security logo, but something about the typography seemed off. "These are fake," I said. "Real federal agents don't need to ask nurses if they've heard from wanted fugitives. They have other ways of finding people." "So who were they?" "Private contractors, probably. Morrison Industries has obviously decided that legal pressure isn't enough. They're escalating to intimidation and surveillance." That night I barely slept. Every sound outside seemed threatening. Car doors closing, footsteps on sidewalks, even the wind rattling Caroline's windows. I was becoming paranoid, jumping at shadows, but in this case paranoia might be the only thing keeping me alive. At 4 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and prepared for my journey to San Francisco. I left Caroline a note thanking her for her help and promising to stay in touch through secure channels. Then I slipped out the back door into the pre-dawn darkness, moving through residential neighborhoods like a fugitive from justice. Which, I realized with a sinking feeling, was exactly what I had become. 6 weeks after the Washington Post article, I found myself at Denver International Airport, about to catch what I thought would be my final flight as a free man. Thomas Chin had arranged a meeting with federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C., and this time, it looked like Morrison Industries might actually face criminal charges. I had spent those weeks moving from city to city, staying in cheap motels and using cash for everything, while Thomas built a case that connected Morrison's operation to a broader network of defense contractor fraud. The Denver morning was crisp and clear, the Rocky Mountains visible through the terminal's massive windows like snow-capped teeth against a blue sky. I had grown to love airports during my weeks as a fugitive. They were neutral territories, places where everyone was in transition, where a man with a nervous expression and too much luggage didn't stand out. I was early for my flight to D.C., so I grabbed coffee and found a seat near my gate. The terminal hummed with the usual airport energy. Business travelers typing frantically on laptops, families corralling children and oversized luggage, tourists consulting guidebooks and maps. For the first time in weeks I felt almost relaxed. That's when I saw him walking through the concourse. Richard Morrison, looking exactly as polished and predatory as the day he had first shown me the truth about my work. He was heading straight for my gate and there was nowhere for me to run. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone to call Thomas, but Morrison was already standing in front of me, his pale blue eyes cold with satisfaction. "Hello, Nathan. Going somewhere?" "Mr. Morrison." I tried to keep my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I'm surprised to see you here." "Are you?" "I've been tracking your movements for weeks. Did you really think those cheap motels and burner phones would keep you hidden?" He sat down in the chair across from me, crossing his legs with casual confidence. "You're not very good at this cloak and dagger business." The coffee in my hands had gone cold, but I gripped the cup anyway, needing something solid to hold onto. Around us, travelers continued their journeys, oblivious to the confrontation playing out in their midst. "What do you want?" I asked. "What I've always wanted. Your cooperation. Your silence. Your complete and total surrender to the inevitable." Morrison leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "You see, Nathan, your little crusade has been entertaining, but it's also been expensive. My clients are becoming impatient. They want this matter resolved. The federal prosecutors have everything they need. Even if something happened to me, the investigation would continue." Morrison's smile was razor sharp. "Would it? Evidence can disappear. Witnesses can be discredited. Prosecutors can be reassigned to different cases. You'd be amazed what money and influence can accomplish." A boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. My flight to D.C. was beginning pre-boarding for first-class passengers. Morrison glanced at the departure board, then back at me. "That's your flight, isn't it? The 10:15 to Reagan National. Meeting with Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh at 2 p.m. tomorrow." He paused, letting that sink in. "Yes, Nathan, we know about your meeting. We know about your lawyer. We know about everything." The blood drained from my face. If Morrison knew about the federal meeting, then my case was already compromised. Thomas had assured me that our communications were secure, that the prosecutors were keeping the investigation confidential. But Morrison's reach was apparently longer than any of us had imagined. "You're finished, Nathan. Your credibility is about to be destroyed, your evidence will be deemed inadmissible, and your lawyer is about to discover that representing you was a career-ending mistake." Morrison stood up, smoothing his expensive suit. "But I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you one final opportunity to end this quietly." "What kind of opportunity?" "Come back to Morrison Industries. Publicly recant your allegations. Admit that you were a disgruntled employee who exaggerated and distorted the truth. In exchange, we'll arrange a comfortable exile for you. A position with one of our subsidiary companies in a nice, quiet country where you can live out your days in relative peace." "And if I refuse?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Then you'll board that flight to Washington, you'll meet with the federal prosecutors, and you'll discover that everything you thought you knew was wrong. Your evidence will turn out to be fabricated. Your credibility will be destroyed. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you're paranoid or if someone is actually watching you." The boarding announcement came again. General boarding was beginning and passengers were lining up at the gate. I had to make a decision: get on that plane and face whatever trap Morrison had prepared, or surrender and accept his offer of comfortable imprisonment. "I need time to think," I said. "I'm afraid time is a luxury you no longer possess." Morrison pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was a news alert: Morrison Industries whistleblower under investigation for corporate espionage. My stomach dropped as I read the brief article. Federal agents had raided Thomas Chen's San Francisco office, seizing documents related to my case. I was being described as a possible foreign agent who had stolen proprietary technology and sold it to competitors. How did you? Money, Nathan. Money and connections and the ability to think 10 steps ahead of idealistic engineers who believe the world operates on principles of truth and justice. Morrison pocketed his phone. The narrative has been changed. You're no longer a whistleblower exposing corporate malfeasance. You're a traitor who stole classified technology for personal gain. Passengers continued boarding my flight, their faces relaxed and normal, completely unaware that my entire world was collapsing around me. I thought about Thomas Chen, about Rebecca Walsh, about all the people who had believed in my story and were now probably facing their own legal and professional disasters. Last chance, Nathan. Get on that plane and face destruction, or come with me and accept a comfortable defeat. I looked at the boarding gate, then at Morrison, then back at the gate. Everything I had worked for, everyone I had trusted, every hope I had harbored was dissolving like sugar in rain. But something deep inside me refused to surrender. "I'm getting on that plane," I said, standing up. Morrison nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Very well. But remember, Nathan, I tried to offer you a way out. What happens next is entirely your choice." I walked toward the gate, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. The gate agent scanned my boarding pass, smiled professionally, and wished me a pleasant flight. I found my seat in the back of the plane, a window seat that looked out at the Colorado mountains, and tried to process what had just happened. The flight to DC was a nightmare of turbulence and second-guessing. Every passenger looked potentially suspicious. Every flight attendant could have been working for Morrison. Every announcement could have been a coded message. I had become completely paranoid, but given what Morrison had already accomplished, paranoia seemed like the only rational response. We landed at Reagan National in the middle of a gray afternoon, rain streaking the terminal windows and creating a mood that perfectly matched my emotional state. I collected my single carry-on bag and headed for the exit, planning to take a taxi to Thomas's hotel where we were supposed to meet before tomorrow's appointment with the federal prosecutors. That's when I saw Thomas waiting for me at the arrival gate, his expression grim and exhausted. "Nathan, we need to talk. The situation has changed." We found a quiet corner of the terminal, away from the crowds and the security cameras. Thomas looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled and strained. "The FBI raided my office this morning," he said without preamble. "They seized everything related to your case, including documents that were supposed to be protected by attorney-client privilege. Morrison told me. He also said I was being investigated for corporate espionage." Thomas nodded grimly. "It's worse than that. They're claiming you were working with foreign intelligence services, that your entire whistleblower story was cover for industrial espionage. They have evidence, Nathan. Documents, financial records, communications that supposedly prove you were being paid by Chinese competitors to steal Morrison's technology. That's insane. I know you didn't. But the evidence looks real and the narrative makes sense from their perspective. A disgruntled employee with access to classified technology, sudden wealth that can't be explained, contacts with foreign nationals." Thomas rubbed his eyes wearily. "They've built a perfect frame-up and I'm not sure we can fight it. What about the meeting tomorrow? What about the federal investigation into Morrison Industries?" "Cancelled. The prosecutors now believe you're a foreign agent who fabricated evidence to damage a legitimate defense contractor. They're more interested in prosecuting you than investigating Morrison." I slumped in my chair, feeling the last of my hope drain away. Morrison had been right. He had thought 10 steps ahead, anticipated every move, and prepared countermeasures that turned my greatest strength into my greatest weakness. "So what do we do now?" "I don't know," Thomas admitted. "This is beyond anything I've ever dealt with. Morrison Industries hasn't just discredited you. They've created an entirely alternate reality where you're the villain and they're the victims." We sat in silence for several minutes, watching travelers move through the terminal with their ordinary problems and normal lives. I envied them their simplicity, their ability to board planes and collect luggage and go home to families who weren't questioning their loyalty to their country. "There's one thing that doesn't make sense," Thomas said finally. "If Morrison has really won, if the narrative has been completely changed, why did he approach you at the Denver airport? Why offer you a deal if he had already destroyed your credibility?" I thought about that conversation, replaying Morrison's words and expressions. Maybe he's not as confident as he pretended to be. Maybe there's still something he's worried about. Like what? Evidence he doesn't know about. People he hasn't corrupted. Some aspect of the story that he can't control. I felt a spark of hope, small but real. What if his frame-up isn't as perfect as it seems? Thomas's eyes brightened slightly. "We need to get out of here and find somewhere secure to analyze what we still have. If Morrison is worried about something, we need to figure out what it is." We left the terminal and took a taxi to a small hotel in Arlington, paying cash and checking in under false names. In the cramped room, Thomas spread out the documents he had managed to save from the FBI raid, while I pulled out the encrypted drives containing evidence I had been carrying since Seattle. For the next 6 hours, we went through everything with renewed determination, looking for the piece of information that Morrison was so desperate to suppress. Financial records, technical specifications, correspondence, personnel files, everything we had accumulated over weeks of investigation. That's when we found it. A single email buried in Morrison's personal correspondence that referenced something called Project Blackbird. The message was brief and cryptic, but it mentioned final phase implementation, and overseas deployment schedules, and eliminating domestic complications. "This isn't just about weapons," Thomas said, staring at the email. "This is about using your surveillance technology for intelligence operations in foreign countries. Morrison isn't just a defense contractor. He's running some kind of private intelligence network." I felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The surveillance drones, the military contracts, the government connections, even the frame-up designed to discredit me. Morrison Industries wasn't just perverting civilian technology for military use. They were using that technology to conduct unauthorized intelligence operations, possibly against American allies, possibly against American citizens. We need more evidence, I said. If we can prove that Morrison is conducting illegal intelligence operations, the espionage charges against me become irrelevant. The government will have to investigate, regardless of what they think about my motivations. How do we get more evidence? They've frozen our assets, discredited our reputations, and probably have us under surveillance. I thought about that question for a long time, staring out the hotel window at the Virginia skyline. Morrison had anticipated almost everything, but he had made one crucial mistake. He had assumed I would either surrender or continue fighting using conventional methods. We don't get more evidence, I said finally. We force Morrison to reveal it himself. The next morning, I did something that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I called Morrison Industries and requested a meeting with Richard Morrison. His assistant was clearly surprised to hear from me, but she scheduled the appointment for that afternoon. Thomas thought I was insane, but I had a plan. Morrison's greatest strength was his ability to control information and manipulate narratives. But that strength could become a weakness if he was forced to respond to a situation he hadn't anticipated. I arrived at Morrison Industries' DC office at exactly 3 p.m., carrying a single briefcase and wearing the kind of defeated expression that Morrison would expect from someone whose life had just been destroyed. The building was smaller than the Seattle headquarters but just as intimidating, all glass and steel and corporate power. Morrison's office occupied a corner of the 15th floor, with views of the Potomac River and the monuments beyond. He was waiting for me behind his desk, looking exactly as confident and predatory as ever. "Nathan, I'm surprised you called. I thought you might have taken my advice and disappeared quietly. I wanted to discuss terms for my surrender." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Surrender? That's a very dramatic word. The espionage charges, the investigation into my finances, the destruction of my reputation. You've won, Mr. Morrison. I'm ready to accept your offer." For the first time since I'd known him, Morrison looked genuinely surprised. "Just like that? No final desperate gambit? No last-minute attempt at heroics? What would be the point? You've proven that you can destroy anyone who opposes you. I'd rather spend the rest of my life in comfortable exile than in federal prison." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying my face for signs of deception. "Very well. But I'll need certain assurances. A complete confession of your espionage activities. A detailed explanation of how you fabricated evidence against Morrison Industries. And most importantly, the return of all proprietary materials, including anything related to Project Blackbird." There it was. Morrison had just confirmed not only that Project Blackbird existed, but that he was worried about what I might know about it. I kept my expression neutral, even as my heart raced with excitement. "I'll need some time to prepare the confession. And I'll need details about this exile arrangement. Where will I be going? What kind of work will I be doing? All in due time. First, I need those materials returned. Particularly anything related to our overseas operations." Morrison was getting sloppy, revealing more information than he intended. But I couldn't push too hard without arousing suspicion. "Of course. I have everything stored in several secure locations. It will take me a few days to collect it all. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires and you face the full consequences of your actions." I nodded and stood to leave, but Morrison wasn't finished. "Oh, and Nathan? Don't think about trying to copy anything or hold back information. We'll know if you do, and the consequences will be severe." I left Morrison Industries feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Morrison had confirmed the existence of Project Blackbird and revealed that it involved overseas operations that he was desperate to keep secret. But I now had less than 24 hours to figure out how to use that information. Thomas was waiting for me at a coffee shop 2 blocks away, his face pale with anxiety. "How did it go?" "Better than expected. Morrison confirmed that Project Blackbird exists and that he's worried about what I know about it. But he's given me 24 hours to surrender all evidence or face the consequences." "What do we do?" "We go to the airport." "What airport?" "Why?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Reagan National. Morrison thinks he's won because he's controlled the narrative. But he's forgotten that the most powerful stories are the ones that reveal themselves." That evening, we returned to Reagan National Airport and positioned ourselves near the baggage claim area. I had called Rebecca Walsh and told her to meet us there with a camera crew, claiming I had new evidence about Morrison Industries. I had also sent anonymous tips to 3 other news organizations, suggesting they might want to be at the airport at a specific time. At exactly 8 p.m., a Morrison Industries corporate jet landed at Reagan National. Through the terminal windows, we watched Richard Morrison and several associates disembark, along with a cargo plane that had followed them from parts unknown. Morrison entered the terminal looking confident and relaxed, clearly expecting to find me cowering in surrender. Instead, he found me standing at the baggage claim carousel, surrounded by reporters and cameras. "Mr. Morrison," I called out as he approached. "Thank you for meeting me here. I believe you said I have nothing to bring home." Morrison's face went white as he realized he had been trapped. Around us, other passengers began to take notice of the commotion, pulling out their phones to record what was obviously some kind of confrontation. "Nathan, what are you doing?" "I'm bringing the truth home, Mr. Morrison. The truth about Project Blackbird, about your overseas operations, about what Morrison Industries really does with the technology one developed." Morrison looked around desperately, realizing that he was surrounded by cameras and witnesses. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand perfectly. You've been using my surveillance technology for illegal intelligence operations. You've been conducting unauthorized surveillance of American citizens and foreign nationals. And when I discovered the truth, you tried to frame me as a foreign agent to discredit my evidence. You have no proof of that." "Don't I?" That's when the airport baggage staff began wheeling out cargo containers from Morrison's private jet. Large metal crates marked with the Morrison Industries logo, exactly the kind of containers that would be used to transport surveillance equipment overseas. Rebecca Walsh was there with her camera crew, filming everything. Other reporters were taking notes and asking questions. Airport security was trying to maintain order while clearly not understanding what was happening. Morrison watched in horror as his carefully constructed narrative began to collapse in real time. The baggage containers were physical proof that Morrison Industries was engaged in activities that went far beyond legitimate defense contracting. "Those containers," I announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "contain surveillance drones equipped with my battery technology. They were being transported for use in unauthorized intelligence operations against foreign nationals and possibly American citizens." Morrison tried to push past the reporters toward the exit, but more news crews were arriving. The story was breaking in real time, broadcast live on social media and cable news. There was no way to contain it, no way to control the narrative, no way to make it disappear. "You have nothing to bring home," Morrison shouted at me, his composure finally cracking completely. "You're a traitor and a thief, and these lies won't save you." But even as he said it, airport security was opening the Morrison Industries containers, revealing rows of sophisticated surveillance drones equipped with the battery systems I had developed. The physical evidence was undeniable, and Morrison's desperate denials only made him look more guilty. That's when Thomas appeared beside me, smiling for the first time since I'd known him. "Nathan, I'd like you to meet Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh. She's been very interested in hearing about Project Blackbird." The federal prosecutor was a serious-looking woman in her 40s, flanked by FBI agents who were eyeing the surveillance equipment with professional interest. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I think we need to talk." As Morrison was led away in handcuffs, I stood in the middle of the airport baggage claim area, surrounded by reporters and evidence and the wreckage of a criminal conspiracy that had nearly destroyed my life. The surveillance drones sat in their containers like metal proof that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing. Rebecca Walsh approached me as the crowd began to disperse. "How did you know Morrison would bring the equipment here?" "I didn't, not for certain. But I knew he was arrogant enough to think he had won, and desperate enough to move quickly to cover his tracks. Men like Morrison always overreach when they think they're untouchable." 6 months later, Morrison Industries was under federal investigation for conducting illegal surveillance operations in 12 countries. Richard Morrison was facing charges for conspiracy, violation of export controls, and conducting unauthorized intelligence activities. The espionage charges against me had been dropped, and I was working with a new company developing legitimate renewable energy technology. But sometimes, late at night, I still thought about that moment at baggage claim when Morrison realized his perfect plan had fallen apart. He had been so certain that power and money and connections could control any narrative, suppress any truth, destroy any opponent. He had forgotten that some stories are bigger than the people trying to tell them, and some truths are too important to stay buried forever. Standing in that airport, watching the evidence of Morrison's crimes being wheeled out for all the world to see, I finally understood what justice looked like. Not perfect, not pretty, but absolutely unstoppable once it begins to move.